Greg, stay on board. I want to talk to you. Actually, in fact, I will challenge the audience about this point. We talk about the ID for development agenda, and we say ID has become a very important element in promoting development. And we talk about the importance of inclusion, and we talk about all the wonderful things that ID can do and open for people in order for them to participate in the fruits of development. And so, having spent the last 3 days with almost every presentation talking about the fact that had the person had a mobile phone with them, they would unlock enormous amounts of access, inclusion, applications, etc. I wonder if we could basically simply say it. If you want to accelerate the development in Africa based on identity, why don't we invest in making sure there are programs which allow Africans to acquire at a low price smartphones? Because to me, that sounds like a if it's an investment we have to make, it's not just about enrolling people, but facilitating to them an Africa phone. Maybe we need to develop an Africa phone which is able to give smart features, not just feature phones, not just SMS, but begin to understand that smartphones be part of this. What do you think, Greg? I mean, is this a meaningful thing? And we have Paul as well.
Yeah. As well. No, I totally believe that. I mean, I think there's no point. Although I spend a lot of time in India, and when I go to India, I do meet people who are trying to do things with feature phones. But India is rather similar to Africa. There are a lot of smartphones there. They just aren't enough at the moment, but they're growing all the time. I think you have to look forward, because if you start building something to enable feature phones to do all the things that we've seen over the last few days, by the time you've got it finished, there'll just be more smartphones. So you have to look forward. And I think the point is that we're not only trying to, a lot of the organizations here are not only trying to enable legal identity, they're also trying to reduce poverty. And the more people that have smartphones in Africa, the more ways there are for them to engage in commerce, in digital commerce. So more smartphone technology will bring so many other benefits as well. I mean, I realize, and I've seen people say, that you can't only look at that in Africa, but I think we have to look forward rather than try and compensate for where some of the people are in Africa now. We have to go forward with that. And I strongly believe the point you just made, yes.
Yeah, I mean, because we keep saying, well, but Africa doesn't have smartphones, But if this is the doorway towards the future, towards getting everybody access and getting everybody empowered, shouldn't we be focusing on building the smartphone population in Africa? And shouldn't we be building programs to do that? I see Paul has joined us back. Paul, what do you think? Does this make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense a lot, but I would say it's like a double-edged sword. I'll use an example for Kenya. Like the M-Pesa success is world-renowned, but it still runs comfortably on a feature phone. It's based on a USSD technology. And that real-time session-based approach to a user experience makes the whole difference. Definitely, smartphones have great features that make it user-friendly, but building around what we have and what seem to work for low-resource settings like feature phones that run on USSD-based application, that would be a great consideration for many, many users, because like the Android-based app for M-Pesa has not really taken up. People are still stuck in the USSD-based application. Definitely, it also runs on a smartphone, but that's a technology developers may think about or should think about.
So how
yeah, I completely agree with that. Well, I think the point is that M-Pesa was designed from the beginning to run on feature phones, because it was designed a long time ago. So I wouldn't take anything away from M-Pesa. It's a fantastic achievement.
Right.
And it doesn't surprise me that it doesn't run on Android or smartphones so well. I think, M-Pesa would have to move to something further along.
New concept.
A new concept, like a super app kind of concept. And I'm sure there are people within M-Pesa who are thinking about that right now. But I think the point is that at the point in time when M-Pesa was developed, there was only feature phones.
Nothing else.
Yeah, nothing else. And I think now we're looking at trying to develop an digital identity infrastructure based on something. So we're kind of caught in the middle here. There are people with feature phones and people with smartphones. So I don't want to ignore all the people with feature phones. And if there's a way that we can target them both together, but what we've seen over the last few days certainly is that, fortunately or unfortunately, all of the industry seems to be focused on the smartphone technology applications, and they're all here now.
Yeah, I think.
Yes, I agree with you. One concern that I have is like smartphones are power hungry, in quotes. I mean, you need power to charge a smartphone, but most of the people in resource limited settings don't have access to electricity. And that is one of the reasons maybe they're still stuck on feature phones. Probably it's not even about affordability. Even people in the city who want phones that last long enough still are stuck on feature phones. So those are the unique dynamics in resource limited settings that we may not know or have a touch and feel of if you've not been to such a setting. But that's the scenario.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a fantastic point you raise, which is that the legacy is not just about the availability of the phone or the cost to acquire the smartphones, but in fact comes back to something as basic as infrastructure. Do you think in Africa we're still at a point where we don't have enough, or the power is so expensive that people will not be able, like power is a commodity. When commodity is available, revolutions happen. So you think Africa right now, we're not yet at the cusp of where power is easily available for people so that smartphones could be kept charged, solar, or even in open forums where cafes where people can just plug. How do you see that, Paul? It's a great insight.
I think power is, let's say like 50, 60, 65% of Africa probably have access to power. It could be slightly expensive. But the other element that crosses my mind right now is the affordability of connectivity, because all these systems run on internet. So connectivity is still reasonably expensive compared to SMS or USSD-based platforms. And so solar is a great option. I wish you'd have a smartphone that you could charge, has a tiny panel to charge with solar, because it could make a whole big difference even in settings where power is not accessible.
We have
I mean, I think Paul's got a point there about the connectivity. The power, I think, if the connectivity was low cost enough, I'm pretty sure that Africans, being innovative and shrewd enough, would find ways to charge their smartphones if they could find the lowest cost for smartphones.
Please raise the panel, raise to the panel the hand that's raised. I mean, Greg and Paul, while we're waiting, surprisingly, every time I'm in Africa, I find better connectivity and more economical connectivity when I buy it and I add it to my phone. Whenever I come back using my own networks, it's always much more expensive. I mean, maybe it's relatively speaking, but I find connectivity is excellent in many of the countries that I've visited. So, but there is hope. We have somebody on the panel. I cannot see your face. Maybe the background is could you turn off your virtual background, introduce yourself, and say who you are from and where are you coming to us today from? Yes. Yeah, unmute, please.
Hi, I'm Abiodun Okola, speaking
welcome.
to you from Nigeria.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So please, you raised the question. Actually, you made a comment. Could you share what you wanted to say?
Okay, it was more like supporting what Paul had said. about power being the major factor sometimes, not a case of affordability on the device, but buying the device is just one part of the problem. Sustaining the device, keeping it always charged, becomes the other part. And just as you also mentioned, internet connectivity, we still have that big issue. More like Abuja is like one of the developed cities next to Lagos. You still have issues with internet connectivity on your mobile. So when we have devices that are talking about biometrics and ID and data integrity becomes a problem when you're trying to transmit information and it breaks along the way, what happens? So for me, I think these are major concerns. The USSD still becomes a lot more reliable, it's more stable. If we're doing things that could be verified, maybe tokenated kind of IDs on USSD, I don't know, but these are just my thoughts.
So it's basically the vision of building mobile ID is still few years out of reach from Africa, because you're saying it's not just the devices are not available for us, but also the infrastructure for power, the infrastructure for connectivity so that we can use these devices. So we have two of you, one from Kenya and one from Nigeria, relatively developed countries ahead of everybody else in Africa. If you had to project where the smart device or smartphone usage in your countries would be, where would you say we're going to get to the enough penetration that it becomes practical to use smartphones as an ID and as a mechanism of accessing service? We'll start with Paul, and then we'll go to
yeah, one thing that I would call a positive of the pandemic is working online and using internet-based communications. So many more people have acquired smart devices, smartphones, tablets, and so forth. So that's one big advantage. I think the last statistic I saw for Kenya, we are like at 65% ownership of smartphones or smart devices. So the remaining 35 could be out of choice or circumstantial situations, but we're not doing so badly. But internet could be the limiting or the challenging factor in this conversation, especially not just internet, but reliable connectivity.
Okay, it's not internet, but also reliable connectivity. Okay, anybody else wants to join this topic before we move away from the mobile platform? In the meantime, I'd like the operators to be ready. I understand we are ready to announce a winner for the grand race. We'll put up, I'll wait for the operator to give me the green light to say I'm ready to put up the slide. Yes, so I see. Why don't we take a small break and announce the winners? We're going to show you the top 10 runners and where they are, and congratulate the winner. Okay, this is wow. This is really, really impressive. You see how tight the race was. So actually, we're ready to declare, is it Khadijatu Tiam from Senegal as the winner. Really, really congratulations. We would love to see if Khadijatu is online, if she can join us to receive the congratulations from us. This is impressive. Go back to the slide, and in the meantime, please continue to see if Madame Tiam is available. Madame Tiam, si vous êtes là, on souhaite vous féliciter en ligne, si vous pouvez participer dans notre Community Voices là. Okay. Congratulations to Madame Tiam, but you could see Nigeria as well as RDC were very, very close. as well as Ethiopia. So this was a tight race, and a lot of people participated, and we're only showing you the top 10 runners in the lead. I guess, operator, could you please share what Madame Tiam has won?
Hi, Dr. Atick. Yes. So, Madam Tiam, you are the proud winner of a new iPhone 11. So we'd like to congratulate you for staying with us and for joining the sessions. Yes, Dr. Atick?
Could you bring her on, please?
Okay. So can one of the operators please assist? I'm sharing screen.
Okay, remove the screen. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Bonjour, Madame Tiam. Madame Tiam, d'abord, est-ce que vous êtes là? Vous m'entendez, Madame Tiam?
Oui, je vous entends.
On ne vous entend pas. On voit que vous êtes là sur le panel, mais on ne vous entend pas.
Allô?
Oui.
Vous m'entendez?
Oui, oui. Félicitations, Madame.
Oui, allô?
Oui.
Allô?
Oui, on vous entend, Madame.
Oui. Bonjour, docteur. Ça a été un plaisir vraiment pour moi de participer à ID for Africa 2020.
It's a pleasure to participate in ID for Africa. Je vais traduire pour les anglophones si ça ne vous ennuie pas. OK. Continuez.
Donc j'y étais en 2019 en Afrique du Sud avec mon directeur et j'ai vraiment apprécié toutes les sessions qui se sont passées.
I went to 2019 in South Africa and I appreciated all the sessions that I attended.
Bien qu'étant un pays francophone et que l'anglais a été déjà des fois un problème pour la traduction.
Even though it was an anglophone country where the French was a challenge.
Mais cela a ouvert des perspectives pour moi pour l'amélioration de tout ce qui est langue, de tout ce qui est état civil ici au Sénégal.
Opened up avenues and motivations for me to improve many things, including the language.
Donc, j'ai vraiment apprécié toutes les sessions qui se sont passées, surtout celles sur les innovations mobiles.
I appreciated all the sessions that have happened, especially all the innovations, mobile innovations that happened this week.
Le Sénégal est en train de mettre un grand projet pour la modernisation de son état civil par le biais des fonds fiduciaires.
The Senegal is in the process of modernizing its civil registration.
Et je pense que c'est une question très importante qu'on puisse avoir les informations nécessaires pour les perspectives d'avenir.
And it's very important for us to have the good information, the right information to give us a perspective as we're doing this project.
Donc, cela a été un plaisir d'être avec vous. Je remercie tout le monde et merci pour le prix.
C'est impressionnant. Vous êtes resté avec nous pendant 3 jours. C'était intense.
Oui.
Very impressive that you were with us for 3 days non-stop and you attended all the sessions and it was intense. So, félicitations, mais aussi, on vous admire, madame. C'est un exemple. On espère que tout le monde va suivre le chemin. We're impressed with what you've done and we hope that everybody will follow in your steps. Vous serez contacté par un agent de ID for Africa pour livrer votre prix, le iPhone 11. OK?
Merci beaucoup, docteur.
Merci, merci. OK. There's still another prize which we will announce later in the program. This will be the stamp related prize. There we will have to do a lucky draw. We'll do it live on the screen. But for now, I want to continue with the discussion. And I see that Professor Henny is with us. Professor, est-ce que vous êtes là? Vous m'entendez? Operator, could you please elevate Professor Henny to the panel?
He's on mute.
OK.
Oui, je suis là. Bonjour, professeur. Bonjour, président. Je voulais juste... vous
traduire pour les anglophones. Alors, on va prendre peu à peu,
Tout
OK?
à fait, OK. Non, je voulais dire que cette pandémie nous a accéléré un peu l'utilisation des technologies. Et
This pandemic has accelerated the utilization of technology.
Elle a aussi accéléré l'utilisation de l'Internet et l'identification.
It accelerated also the utilization of the internet and the identification.
En Algérie, nous avons pu terminer l'année universitaire et l'année scolaire grâce aux technologies à distance.
Because of the technology, we were able to complete the scholar year in the university and the schools by learning at distance in Algeria.
Et aujourd'hui, nous allons démarrer l'année universitaire le 15 décembre en utilisant près de 70% des cours universitaires online.
Starting in the middle of December, we are starting the new scholar year with 70% of the courses are going online for the new year.
En utilisant bien sûr tout ce qui est téléphone, tout ce qui est et l'Algérie a diminué les prix de l'Internet pour les citoyens.
Algeria lowered the price of the internet for the citizens.
Et c'est gratuit pour les étudiants.
And it is free for the students. C'est une politique très bien, très importante. Espérons que les autres pays africains vont suivre la même politique. C'est l'accès, c'est l'inclusion. C'est ça qu'on a dit. C'est pas juste l'identité, mais aussi les moyens d'accéder aux services. C'est important. Bravo. Est-ce que c'était un décret ou c'était un acte de loi? Comment ça s'est passé? How did you arrive at this? Was this a law that was passed, or was this an executive order? How did it work?
C'était une convention interministérielle entre le ministère parce que le président, je suis plus à la justice, je suis au ministère des télécoms. C'est entre notre ministère de télécoms et le ministère de l'enseignement supérieur et le ministère de l'éducation.
OK. C'est très intéressant. Merci, professeur Hani. Merci pour cette information et aussi pour votre soutien du mouvement ID for Africa. Vous continuez d'être l'ambassadeur d'ID for Africa dans votre pays. So thank you very much for being the continuing support of the ID for Africa movement, for continuing to be the ambassador of the movement in your country. So thank you so much. Okay, let's continue this discussion. I want to move to another topic. Anybody wants to come to the panel, you're welcome. We're doing a chat here. There's a lot that we would like to talk about, but I want to give priority to what you want to talk about. One of the things that is related to mobile identity is this idea of what is the role of the different players into the ecosystem. So when you look at, you've got with the mobile, with the fact that now we're more and more digital, a new important role is emerging, which is the private sector. Digital identity is now moving away from the way we used to think about identity in the past as being an identity document. And now we're starting to make a distinction between a digital identity and an ID document. And so for me, the way I see it, I see that digital identity is something that we control. We need a storage mechanism, a bank or a store, which could be a phone. And just like money, just like funds, identity is just like funds. It's basically, you need to store it somewhere. You need to have it in a bank, or you need to have it carried in a wallet, okay? But at the end of the day, that money has no value unless there are two ways. One is that money is an accepted currency, which means you have to have people that accept that money. Otherwise, I could be very rich and walk into a country and they say, we don't accept this money. Therefore, my money is not good in that country. So identity is like money. It has to have value. for two reasons. One, it has to be accepted, so there should be services that are dependent on it. But the second one is it has to have a trust value, just like money. I mean, I'm holding a piece of paper. The fiat model of monetary systems, the fiat model, as you know, the standard model fiat, is the model which basically says that it is the government that power of commitment. It's not the gold. There is no gold being held. So in my mind, sitting for the last 3 days, I've been seeing how this is emerging in the identity ecosystem. So we've got basically wallets, banks, and identity stores that are holding identity. And then we enrich that identity through attestation. So the more I get attestations to my identity, the more it has value. And so what is attestation? Attestation could be an ID card issued to me by the government with an NFC. I can make it pair with my iPhone, and therefore it says, not only do I claim my identity myself, but here is a government agency with a trust level that's very high that is basically saying, I am who I claim to be. Therefore, my identity is good, my credit is good. So identity credit becomes depending who's backing me in my claim, okay? So it could also be a birth certificate. It could also be one area which I have not heard much about, but it's still very important, and I think it's going to be the future, is what others think of me, social identity and attestation by others. For example, when I don't know somebody, what is the first thing that I do online? I don't ask them to send me their ID document. I don't. I go and Google to check their LinkedIn account to see what is this person's. For example, over the last 3 days when I was interacting with people, obviously I don't know who these people are. And the only way that I could develop knowledge of them or trust was by going to their reputation, to their social identity, to their LinkedIn identity, and say, oh, this is an interesting person, they've done something relevant, therefore I connect with them. So I think we need to move away from the concept that identity is a government business. Attestation is one element that governments could do in order to give us credit in our identity. But identity is not a government business. Identity is basically an individual business, and a private sector can also help us enrich our identity. Governments can help us improve the trust in identity. Service providers can help us make our identity valuable because our identity opens up doors. So I'd like to have a discussion around this. It's like, let's call it the fiat model of identity, because at the end of the day, it is very much like currency, like money. Identity in the digital world is very much like currency. And we can use that model to guide us in thinking about what are the roles of the different players in this ecosystem. So I'd like to have somebody join, come in. I mean, anybody in Africa that would like to comment on this model and like to comment on the philosophy behind it. The claim is identity is not a government business. Identity is an individual business. Great, yes. And anybody else that wants to join the panel, step up and let's hear it from you.
While the other attendees are thinking about what they might like to say, yeah, I have to say, I absolutely agree with you, Joseph. I mean, I think it's true that before COVID and before there was this tremendous emphasis on accelerating digital, people had already talked about this idea that identity is not only a government business. And we've seen that in other parts of the world, particularly in Europe, Northern Europe particularly, where a lot of people rely on identities from banks, a bank identity. And I think there was an idea that this could expand before now. But what you're seeing now with this tremendous emphasis on digital identity because of COVID and people having to work remotely and exist remotely and needing to prove themselves online is that, as you say, digital identity can be provided by other organizations aside from governments. And which organizations they would be, I mean, really depends upon, I think, firstly, which organizations are trusted, and that's not the obvious ones like governments and banks. It could be other organizations as well. And I think it also depends upon the use cases. And that comes back to the attestation that you were talking about earlier. And I think your comparison with fiat currency, I mean, the way I think about that is that if you think about currency, at the moment, we still really only have fiat currencies, and now people are talking about digital currencies and decentralized digital currencies. And of course, that's created a lot of consternation among central banks, and central banks are now already thinking about digital currencies. But I think that kind of there's a parallel with in the identity space. The fiat currency perhaps is analogous to the government produced identities. But now we have other organizations, whether they're banks or whether they're mobile operators, or whether they could be organizations which simply relate to a specific application. And I think people will be handling and using more and more digital identities. How they relate back to if you like, the core identity for each individual, their root identity, perhaps is another word, the government identity, remains to be seen. But I think we're going to see a tremendous explosion in the use of these various digital identities. And we're seeing that certainly in other parts of the world, in Europe, in Asia. But I can see now that this could come to Africa very, very quickly.
Yeah, I think so. I think we've seen, for example, in the discussion yesterday we had with MasterCard, they've been developing a community identity. They've been working with organizations that are trying to identify their community in a robust and meaningful way. And at some point, they may link or may not link with the government identity. I think the notion that we need to broaden the aperture for identity in order to allow this innovation has become even more and more possible in a digital world. For the most part, I use my identity, digital identity, which is multiple, I have many of them, a lot more than I use my officially issued identity. My officially issued identity, I use it when I travel for the most part, but after that, I use my digital identity that I have with other organizations that have established me. Of course, they needed at some point to fix my identity, either by using the official identity that I have, or by interviewing me and validating that I am a unique individual and I exist. So I think we need to broaden that. Another thing that I heard this week was the concept of tokens. And that's something that we think in the 2021, we are going to see more of it, which is the idea that instead of using your identity directly, you're using a proxy for your identity that's more privacy preserving. It's a token. Somebody gives me a token and they will say, for this journey, you will have a token. Maybe, Professor Hani, je peux vous demander une question. Est-ce que vous voyez les tokens, les tokenisations, comme quelque chose qui va être important chez vous, ou c'est trop tôt maintenant? Le tokenisation, c'est l'idée que l'identité, on peut avoir un certain code qui est valable peut-être pendant une certaine période limitée, ou valable pour certaines applications uniquement, peut-être one-time use, une seule fois, etc. Comment vous voyez le tokenisation dans votre domaine?
En Algérie, nous avons dans notre carte d'identité nationale, il y a dans une puce, il y a un numéro d'identification nationale. Donc, ce qui fait que nous avons dans la carte d'identité, nous avons l'authentification et nous avons aussi la signature électronique et l'authentification qui sont dans la carte d'identité nationale, la nouvelle carte d'identité. Aujourd'hui, en Algérie, on n'a pas, tous les Algériens n'ont pas encore leur carte d'identité. Nous sommes à peu près autour de 25 millions qui ont leur carte. Il reste encore une dizaine de millions.
So, 25 million people in Algeria have the national identity card, which has the digital signature and has a unique number.
Donc, et nous avons maintenant le numéro, nous avons dans le passeport, le même numéro, nous avons dans le passeport, la carte d'identité, le permis de conduire. Ils sont tous des documents électroniques biométriques et qui contiennent des informations, qui contiennent aussi des numéros. Donc, dans le futur, on compte utiliser la carte d'identité pour toute opération, aussi bien administrative qu'autre.
OK. So you're planning on using the national identity number which exists on the ID card for all the operations. Mais vous n'avez pas de plan pour utiliser un tokenisation. Ça veut dire donner à la personne la possibilité de générer plusieurs numéros qui sont spécifiques à l'application. Par exemple, dans le secteur santé, j'ai un numéro qui est lié dans l'arrière-plan, mais ce n'est pas compatible avec les numéros pour les finances, etc.
Oui, nous avons d'autres numéros. Nous avons par exemple le numéro de la sécurité sociale.
Okay.
C'est un numéro qui est lié. Nous avons le numéro d'identifiant fiscal pour les fiscs, okay, pour les fiscs, qui est aussi un numéro qui est lié. Nous avons d'autres numéros. Nous avons des numéros sociaux pour les gens qui ont besoin d'aide sociale, aussi qui est relié à ce numéro. Mais le seul qui reste, le numéro seul qui n'est pas modifié, qui est validé par la biométrie, c'est le numéro d'identifiant, c'est le NIN.
Okay. So there are other numbers in Algeria which are used, sectorial numbers, and they are linked to the national identity number in the behind the scenes. So people can still use those numbers, and presumably in the future there will be a privacy issues, so people may opt to use a sectorial number instead of a national number. That's an interesting observation. Thank you. Brenda Kilio, do you want to get on the panel? Operator, could you bring Brenda on the panel? She's asking a question: how do we separate identity and national security? I think it's still important for the governments to take charge. Understand? So what Brenda is saying, identity, while we're saying identity is not just the government business, it doesn't mean that government cannot continue to use applications for identity. National security is the application, and that happens to be a government business. They have to assure their population of their security. Therefore, that's not a problem. But that does not mean that that's the exclusive use of identity. Identity back in the early 2000s, when we started the identity field, the first and only application that we had at the time was really national security. Identity for law enforcement, then national security, and then now we moved into a world after Aadhaar, after the India program demonstrated tremendous value from Aadhaar, identity for development. And so now we're in a phase where identity can be used for national security, can be used for law enforcement, can be used for development, and also now public health with COVID coming in. No question, Brenda, that we agree with you that the government still has to take charge, still has to attest for identity, because for national security, I can't take the word, I can't take self-sovereign identity or self-attestation, or even the identity that somebody had constructed on LinkedIn or Facebook. So those are not acceptable for that application, but they are acceptable perhaps for other applications. So we understand that identity, what identity you use is dependent on the application that you're specific. The operator is telling me that there's somebody that we want to unmute to add to this discussion. Could you please bring that person live? Okay, there is somebody that's asking a question. Maybe he's not able to connect by video or audio. And the question has to do, how can we deal with the skepticism surrounding the security of personal data with many attacks banks and governments have been victims of? So la question, c'est le scepticisme autour de la protection des données. On voit beaucoup d'incidents où il y avait de pertes de données. So basically, the question is, I think I share, I don't know who this question came from, but I share that skepticism and I share that concern. And that's why I believe it's not just a question of trust me, we're going to take care of your data. I think there are two necessary elements that I see in this area. One is I'd like to see privacy by design. I'd like to see that even if somebody tried to do something bad to my data was either minimized, or they could not access all of it at once, or they could not. I'd like to have a system architecture where the design of the data did not allow the fire. There were firewalls, just like we build in buildings firewalls, so that when a fire goes in one location, it doesn't reach out and destroy everything. So we need to build firewalls to protect the data. So the data needs to be segmented, protected, etc. But one more important thing, and I can tell you, I can testify to that from a personal experience in the US, is recourse. Let us say you violated my civil rights or my privacy rights. If I'm in a country where I have no recourse, which means I have no ability to go after you, then it will encourage people to do everything that they can without having any consequences. Let me give you an example, which I was a friend of the court case, which happened over the last 5 years. This was a law in Illinois called BIPA law, Biometric Identification Privacy Framework, which was what is state law. Illinois is a state in the United States. And they had basically said, you cannot use, as a commercial entity, you cannot use my biometric data without my consent. Okay, explicit consent. It's not just, oh yeah, you gave me a notice. You have to get my explicit consent. For me to grant you that, you have to ask me and I have to give it to you. So Facebook basically did not ask people's consent. It was in the privacy notice, but it was buried somewhere and it did not meet the standard. So what happened is they got sued. They got sued, and basically they settled for $550 million. So it's $500 million to settle a lawsuit, just simply because in one state, which is the state of Illinois, they did not ask for people to agree that they're going to be using their facial template in order to do just suggestion from your friends. And you could say, where was the damage? Why was I impacted, and what was the damage in the process? The court said, no, it's not a question of damage. It's a question of basically, it is your right not to give that consent, even if it's minor, even if it does not have any damaging consequential damage. So with a law like this, what happened afterwards? Immediately, Google, immediately Apple, immediately Microsoft, immediately everyone else changed the privacy notices. In fact, did you know on YouTube today, you are not allowed to use any of the YouTube to do facial recognition on? They tell you explicitly, that's a violation of our policy. They updated the policy, they sent it out to everybody and said, hey, you cannot use facial recognition on anything in our database. And so they're starting to protect more, and that's simply because there is a recourse. So that's what we have to learn from, is that, yes, you can be skeptical, but the fact is, if the law allows me to have a recourse, then you'll say to them, violate my rights and I'll get after you. There is no shortage of lawyers. We call them the ambulance chasers. No shortage of lawyers that will take the case on a contingency basis, and they will get settlements, multi-$100 million, even billion-dollar settlements that we're seeing now. So I think while I share the skepticism with whoever asked that question, I'll say to you that if the law is in such that I have recourse, I feel the industry and those who will violate our law, our privacy, will be hesitant to do so because of the consequential liability. The liability could be huge. So let's not forget about that. Let's not forget about that. Greg, you wanted to add something? Unmute, unmute. Unmute, Greg.
There we go. I was just going to say on the subject of this question about the security of personal data, I would take that back to what you were talking about previously with tokenization. So tokenization is one of the solutions that can protect against the loss of personal data. With the digital identity becoming more and more prevalent, we're going to see more and more transactions, identity transactions, online identity transactions, and it's absolutely imperative that those identity transactions should be tokenized, so that if there is anybody intrudes upon those transactions, they would be unable to gain anything worthwhile from those tokens, because the tokens do not do not relate to actual identity data. They're only a token which can only be translated back by the issuing authority. And that's what we're already seeing in payments. We're seeing that all payment data now being transmitted around payment network is tokenized. And as you mentioned earlier, it's not only tokenized, but it can be tokenized for specific uses by specific organizations. And outside of the use by that specific relying party for that specific purpose, that token is completely valueless, has no value at all. Yeah. I think that's something that's going to be increasingly important as we can increasingly digitize identity transactions.
Exactly. OK, we're going to continue. Professor Henny, merci beaucoup pour votre intervention et à bientôt, très bientôt. OK, so before we announce the other winners from the passport prize, what we're going to try to do is sort of impromptu. Maybe Greg and I will try to summarize some of the things that we've heard over the last couple of days, so we can close with a little bit of a summary. I think over the last couple of days, I think there is, as I mentioned, there seems to be an evolution of the role of the various players in the ecosystem. I see the government more and more being limited in the production of a very secure and valuable document, but the private sector coming in and consuming that document and then creating a derived identity. So the concept of derivative identity is becoming important. We saw a lot of NFC, a lot of people saying, well, I'm gonna put this against my smartphone, and then I recover some of the information that becomes reliable information because it came from a reliable credential, reliable document. I also, another possibility is for an identity portal, which we heard a lot about, will connect to a government database, driver's license database, or national ID database, like Verify Me, for example, with NIMSI in Nigeria. It can reach out to the database and validate that this is indeed exists. This is the person who they claim to be. And so, but at that point in time, from that point onward, that's a derived identity, that's a derived token that is acceptable and can be moving forward. So we're seeing the emergence of new roles for new players from the private sector. And by that, I mean, not just the industry that produces the technology, like we've been hearing over the last couple of days, that is enabling that. We're basically also understanding more and more that people are looking for useful identity. This is important. People want their identity to do things for them. In fact, yesterday I was struck by a statement from a Thales presentation where basically somebody saying it was almost passive boycott. You put up a program in place, and then there were people who were passively boycotting the identity program. And when you ask the question why, it's because they said it's not useful. It doesn't do anything for me that I cannot do today. And that's changing. Now that's changing because in the digital context, we're seeing identity being useful is very important. And before you jump in and say, well, are you saying legal identity is not important? Legal identity is very important. So don't misunderstand what I'm saying in that regard, because legal identity gives me certain rights that I cannot get with digital identity. Legal identity gives me the right to vote. That's a useful function. Gives me the right to travel. That's a useful function. So you can't just simply say, oh, because it's digital identity, it's not important. It's more important than legal identity. And by the way, digital identity could be digital link to legal identity. So the source is important and will ultimately dictate what the derived identity can or cannot do. But at the end of the day, we need to focus on usefulness of identity. So we've also had this contact versus contactless debate all across. There was a lot of people talking about the use of contactless. I'm not ready to write off the contact world. I'm not ready to say this is dead, this is not dead. And I can tell you why. One message which repeatedly came across from the sessions was in the world we live in, we don't just touch one tiny thing called the sensor. We touch so many things in the public. We touch tables, we touch doorknobs, we touch. So if you're basically going to say, well, you got sick because you touched the sensor. That means that we're building the wrong hygiene. That means we're building the wrong hygiene, because you may have a face recognition in a room where you entered and you touched things. So at the end of the day, that's not the right solution. Legacy systems in Africa continue to rely on fingerprints, and therefore we need to be able to leverage, whether it's contact legacy or adding new dimensions which are contactless. So I think I'm seeing a lot of forward-looking and future-proof technologies coming in, but the important thing not to forget in Africa, the legacy compatibility. We've just heard also on the panel, people saying we have, sometimes the infrastructure is not enough. We have to be compatible with feature phones instead of just smartphones. So the contactless debate took place in ID for Africa this week, but I can tell you there was not a clear-cut knockout. We see more important roles for face recognition and more important roles for iris, but fingerprint continues to be an important modality and dimension. Actually, one application that struck me about face recognition, which I'll share with you, was the application where you use face for activating an ID. So, you enroll, you go to a place, you enroll, etc. Then the issuance happens. But the question is, between the issuance and you arriving to have this and in your hand, there is a possibility that in the mail or in the distribution process, it can get lost. And so what a wonderful application would be to basically use face recognition to say to people, okay, you want to activate this, you use face recognition to do a selfie and activate. Of course, that assumes that you have a phone with a selfie. So that was one thing that I took as a take-home message, as an important one. Digital onboarding was everywhere. Basically, NFC, digital onboarding, cloud, etc. We saw that. We heard a lot about governments being under pressure to catch up with expectations to offer digital services to people. We heard a lot about the credential chain, that now there is downstream identity, which is derived. We talked about that in a minute. And then the level of trust depends on the level of the original source, but also the transformation chain. If somewhere along the chain, that chain of trust got interrupted, then the identity level the identity trust can go down. I was very surprised, I have to share with you, that not much was said about interoperability. I think if the industry believed that interoperability was the most important driver, we would have heard it everywhere. We would have heard them say, well, my product interoperates with everybody else. I think that was not a message that I've heard. I heard that, we've got a solution end to end, but I think we need to revisit that in 2021, the question of interoperability. Smart ID in the past used to mean a smart card. Now, smart ID, when I hear that, it means an identity, digital identity held in a smart fashion, either in a smart portion of a device or over the cloud. We talked about the idea of mobile as a driver of development. Let us hope in the future that Africa will resolve its infrastructure issues and will have more and more mobile devices to give access. SIM registration was also an important element. We see that people have succeeded in running programs. Tanzania, for example, in a recent episode of the livecast, we've heard about how they motivated people to come and register by having the SIM tied to the identity number. Another thing that I heard was not one size fits all. That was the message that we got. Different. You want to enroll in an office, you want to enroll in a field, you want to enroll on board, different enrollment mechanism, different use. There is no one size fit all. You've got to analyze what your population's expectations are, what your infrastructure is, and what the applications that you want to support. And then you have a portfolio. Luckily, what you saw yesterday was plethora, plenty of ideas, plenty of solutions. The marketplace is healthy. It's not dominated by anyone, like I said before. and basically it bodes well for customers because that means competition will drive prices and choice will drive prices. So I have other things, but let me stop here. Greg, let me invite you. Did you hear other things that I have not mentioned in this list? I know we've talked about this.
Yeah, I think the thing that let me just check. I think the thing that I heard that sparked my interest, because I heard it more than once, was the idea of, I guess it's kind of a tokenization, the tokenization of biometrics, so that biometrics could be used digitally. I'm not sure whether tokenization or hashing is the word, but that's what led me to think about this idea of tokenization. And I think that's something that I'm surprised in retrospect that we didn't hear more about that. But I think this subject of tokenization is going to come back for digital identity, because if we're going to pursue digital identity, as you and I just talked about here with other people, I think that's definitely something that's required. I think the issue of, you know, the tremendous focus on mobile now. Yeah, I think we have to. I'm not sure if I should go back and correct what I said earlier on in this fishbowl. I said, well, we have to look forward. We have to look forward because there are going to be more and more smartphones. But okay, maybe we're leaving a lot of people out of that, and we still need to look at solutions that are closer, perhaps, to payment transactions using USSD, like M-Pesa.
Right.
And when I think about it, all the way through this 3 days of technology demonstrations and showcases by vendors from all over the world, I don't remember seeing a single one of them that was using feature phones. And I mentioned earlier on that when I go to India, I usually see a few. I'm not saying that there are a lot of them, but I always see a few there. I mean, they're either focused on identity or payments, but there are people there still looking at the idea of doing things with feature phones. And I think perhaps some of the vendors, some of the suppliers and solutions providers that spoke over the last few days, if they're interested in Africa, they're going to have to look on both sides of the fence. I think that's what I would say.
In fact, that's great. I actually, over the last 3 days, I accumulated word frequency. I just collected some words and I made the top 10 words that I've heard over the last 3 days. And before we move on and welcome another guest on the Community Voices, let me share those words with you because they could be relevant. These are the top 10 words that I've heard over the last 3 days: inclusion, privacy, standards, tokens, usefulness, convenience, trust, centralized versus non-centralized, smart ID, and legacy. So these are the top 10 words that have occurred in the last 3 days regarding what the discussions are and around what topics they are. So maybe that's a topic we can discuss, but first we do that. Mikhail, thank you so much. Please introduce yourself and unmute yourself. Welcome.
I'm just checking. Can everybody see me and hear me?
Yes, we can see you loud and clear, and you've got a beautiful city behind you.
Yes, welcome everyone. My name is Michiel van der Veen. I'm calling from The Hague, from the Ministry of the Interior. I have 2 points to bring in, Joseph. One is on the inclusion part. Was indeed part of the conference, is a very important topic to make sure that all these systems are accessible and also understandable for all these people. With the move towards digitization, it doesn't become easier. I find it for myself quite difficult to understand, let alone for all the people who needs to make a use for all these systems. So it's also probably a call for the industry to look for solutions that are of course suitable for the majority groups, but also in particular for the groups which are more vulnerable.
Definitely, inclusion was high on the subject. One thing that I would have liked to see more of was the concept that identity, a risk-based approach to identity. We're still not thinking, we're thinking in a binary way that this is identity, it's either exists or doesn't exist. To me, identity is lots of gray, shades of gray. Any identity could be useful, but it may not be trusted. And maybe depending on what applications it is, the trust level rises and it starts to be applicable. We have to move away from the binary concept. And I didn't see much of discussion about risk-based identity. It's highly important related to trust, especially in a digital context, because for me, any identity is useful identity. And that ties into the inclusion aspect. Because if I could allow my population to just come in, self-declare or declare through a community center, may not be as reliable as receiving a $10,000 contract. But if I can give them $50 for a month to help them until I validate, there is value in that identity. And that's what governments need to start thinking about, the 50 shades of gray of identity. I don't know if that's a concept, but it is something that we have to start building towards. Because
I absolutely agree with that. I know the Ministry of Interior of the Netherlands has done a lot of work on that, on
right.
looking at the idea that identity is not absolute. Identity is relative. And I strongly believe that's the future of identity. So I'll just add my voice to that. Yes.
Mikhail, you wanna comment on that?
Yes, absolutely. And I can share maybe one of the questions that we are currently struggling with or addressing, and maybe also ask for help in the community with that.
That's great.
Is that relates obviously to the digital identity part, and yes, that is part of the individual. It's not a government task, but it's an individual task. But that raises the question, who is doing that on behalf of the individual? And what is the role of the government? Because in the end, it's a stakeholder game. There are people, or there are institutions who need to accept that identity. The person needs to control that identity, and probably the government needs to set up frameworks to allow that to happen. And there needs to be technology that makes it work, which is interoperable and vendor neutral, and maybe even open source. So the concept is clear, and we're moving towards that concept, but we are really looking into ways on how do we move forward with that in a practical manner with so many stakeholders.
Exactly. Great. Actually, we've reached the point now where we want to announce, actually, we don't know who the winners are because we have to do a lucky draw, but we would like to run that process. Again, we had a small competition, a contest, the grand race. We announced who the winner was, and it was a lot of effort for the individuals to stay on board and compete with each other and interact with the sessions and get the sweep numbers on, etc. But for the, sorry, Mikhail, thank you so much for your contribution, and we'll catch up in another context. And the passport stamp was kind of a creative game where you allow people to go and visit and interact with other exhibitors and innovators, and at that point in time they receive a stamp, almost like in passports, keeping with the tradition of the world tour, visiting one country to the other. They received a lot of passports. And so we said, anybody who manages to get over 25 stamps will be eligible for the lucky draw. So I don't know where we are in that competition, how many people made it. It's not easy because you have to go interact with people and then ask for a stamp. So it takes effort. So operator, are we ready to show the people who were who exceeded 25 stamps, and also to run the random drawing in order to determine who is the winner? So operator, if you're there, could you please show who the top passport entries were? Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Dr. Atick. So we'll first show who the selected 4 are for the passport entry contest. I'll just call it, I hope everyone is in this room, because you could be walking away with an iPhone SE today. We have Alphonse Malabiche. He's from NIDA in Tanzania. I think I saw Alphonse in the audience, so you're here. That's good. We have Musa Busavuli, sorry, and he's from the Office of the Special Advisor in charge of digital, I believe that should have been identity, from DR Congo. And Musa, I know you're with us today. Okay, we have Sintayehu Tadesse from the Ministry of Agriculture in Ethiopia. And we also have Umar Ahmed from NIDA in Nigeria.
Right.
So these are our
Let me
candidates.
point out, Shana, sorry to interrupt you. Let me just point out. So these were the 4 people who made it to the finish line, which means they've collected more than 25 stamps. So therefore, they will be eligible for a drawing, random drawing. So congratulations for having stuck with the game and you made it above 25 stamps. I have to say, I could not make it. It's definitely not a simple task. So anyway, Shauna, what's next?
Okay, so now we've entered the names into our platform for this lucky draw. And can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is the lucky draw online.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. And then now we're going to go ahead and start. So we'll just give that a bit of a shake. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We do our draw. Okay, then we have
Musa. Congratulations.
Congrats, Musa. Let me just share this this other screen.
Bring
okay,
Musa
I believe
on.
Musa is here. Let's see. Let's get Musa up. Oh, I saw him earlier, but I don't see him now.
He's been promoted.
He's been okay. Very good. Okay, let's bring you on. Welcome, Musa.
Musa. Félicitations.
Yes.
Félicitations. Comment allez-vous?
Merci beaucoup.
Oui. Non, on a 2 qui arrivent.
Je ne sais pas si vous m'entendez.
Il y a 2
Oui.
dames qui arrivent là.
On vous entend? Oui.
Merci beaucoup, Dr Joseph Atick. Merci beaucoup à toute l'équipe de Atick for Africa. Et merci à tous les participants. J'ai beaucoup travaillé pour sensibiliser les compatriotes congolais à ne pas rater ce marathon parce qu'il y avait beaucoup de choses à apprendre. Je suis resté pendant 3 jours scotché sur mon ordinateur et mon téléphone. Ma fille ne connaît pas pourquoi je faisais ça. Je disais qu'il y avait, c'était comme une université, il y avait beaucoup de choses à apprendre. Mais quand elle me demandait, mais compte moi après, qu'est-ce que tu vas gagner? Il dit, bah, je suis gagné un téléphone. Bon, au Ghana, elle sera très contente d'apprendre que, au-delà de tout ce que j'ai appris, j'ai quand même gagné un téléphone. Merci.
Je vais traduire. Actually, as you all know, Musa was not only on this competition, but he was also in the grand race, and he was actually very close, very, very close, because very small points away from being the top winner. I have to say, you've done a massive effort. We appreciate it. I saw you in many of the sessions, the questions and participation. You gave an example of engagement. You also, as an ambassador of ID for Africa, have motivated many others from your country to attend. I think that's wonderful spirit. And I cannot imagine anybody more deserving. There are a lot of people who deserve the prize, but you particularly deserve for all the efforts that you've done. So here's a case where effort plus chance worked out in your favor. Alors, félicitations. Merci beaucoup de tout ce que vous avez fait pour la cause d'identité en Afrique et la RDC et aussi le mouvement ID for Africa. Félicitations, encore une fois. Okay, I think we may have lost Musa. Vous êtes là? I think we may have lost him.
Je n'entends plus rien.
Ok, c'est pas grave, Musa. Félicitations, merci beaucoup et congratulations. Okay, so and congratulations, of course, to be for the lady from Senegal who also won in this competition. We're very pleased. Maybe Greg now 2 phones down and $1 billion to go in order to equip the rest of Africa with smartphones. Anyway, operator, I think we have reached the end of our program. We reached the end of a year essentially that we've spent with you through our live casts and through our the marathon. We really, I'd like, before we close, I'd like to sincerely thank everybody who has been supporting and participating. Of course, first and foremost, the ambassadors of ID for Africa. The ambassadors of Africa who have been diligently working. As you've seen, several of them were moderators and involved in the sessions, etc. I'll thank all the sponsors and exhibitors who have been with us over the last 3 days. I'll thank the staff of ID for Africa who have been diligently working, every single one of them. I'd say maybe they have not slept they have not slept for only 2 or 3 hours a night. I thank our partners from APSCA, Greg Pote, who's also our Chief Information Officer for ID for Africa, for his assistance this week and for being with us on this panel. And of course, since this is the close of the year, and since I have said that the live casts and the marathon are complementary to each other, I want to thank our partners, development partners, who have supported us through the live cast, the Gates, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Omidyar Network. And basically to explain to you that next we will go back to the live casts. We will have them like we used to have them before the marathon, on the rhythm of maybe 2 or 3 a month. And the next one that's on schedule is January 14. So we will take a little break for the end of the year to wrap things up for the holidays. Hopefully, all of you will have a safe and enjoyable break this end of this 2020. While 2020 was a very, very, very challenging year, all of you have testified and lived the personal hardships and challenges. It has also been a year of reaffirmation. We've reaffirmed our community. The last 3 days were the culmination of that, but the live casts have shown us new ways in which we can stay together, even though while we continue to be apart. So I'm pleased that we're ending the year with that, but I can tell you, I cannot wait to see you physically, to be in the same room, to have a cup of coffee, to have a drink, and to hear you speak. But until then, expect us to stay with you in this virtual medium. Expect us to be continuing to inform the community and to keep it together. I thank everybody for their dedication, and I look forward to a better 2020 year even more, and all levels. So thank you very much.